Good morning. Good to see all of you this morning, and I know you feel good that you can be seen. That's good for y'all. All right. We're in the 18th chapter of Revelation. We started this last week, and you remember what happens in 18. The city of Babylon, the physical existence, is destroyed, and along with the commercial system and the part of the governmental system and those kind of things. And but it concentrates a lot on the commercialism and the trade and the buying and selling and all of those kind of things. And we got down to about verse 12. Now, verse 12 and 13 are is a list, or both of them are a list of things that are no longer going to be available. And you notice as you read that list that much of it are things that only the people with money, some with a lot of money, are going to be able to afford. It talks about vessels of ivory. You know, the average person wouldn't have that, and pearls and precious stones and gold and silver. And so it's trying to, I think, give us the impression or the information that this is not only the destruction of a city, but this is the destruction of a whole commercial enterprise that is worldwide. And the people who are going to be suffering from this are going to be the ones who are the ones who adhere to the Antichrist teachings. They've taken the mark of the beast. They've, increased their wealth at the expense of other people, primarily any believer, because they won't sell to them, they won't buy from them. They've watched people starve out. They don't get medical attention, things of that nature. But yet you've got a whole society, if you will, that's buying and selling and taking advantage of the system, and they're price gouging. Now, thankfully, we're not seeing any of that in our country today. There is no price gouging. Anyway, don't get me started on that. Before we get started, Larry, our deepest sympathies to you and your family, and if there's anything we can do, let us know. So, it's good to see you, brother. I'm glad you're here this morning. So, notice in the latter part of verse 13, right near the end of that sentence, the thing that it's talking about beyond merchandise says, and slaves. Slavery is going to be not only existent, but probably prolific during this time. Now, who will the slaves be? Some of it is going to be people who are saved or who are claiming Christ, and they are not killed, but they're taken into slavery. Others are going to be poor people who are trying to make a living, trying to get enough food to eat, to supply their families. And, they're going to be slaves to whoever they work for. Now, when you talk about slaves in this instance, it may not be the same thing we think about that happened back in the 17 and 1800s in this country. It might be, I don't know, but they may be slaves to a commercial system. They may work long, hard hours for very little pay, just enough to survive on. And, they're going to have a tough existence, whoever they may be. It seems like there's only going to be two classes of people, those who are extremely poor and those who work for the wealthy. I don't think you're going to see much of a middle class when we get to this point in time and history. But when we look at this, we start wondering why or how did everything get to be in this shape? Well, I think if you go back to James chapter 4, we get some insight. Now, who did James write to? Did he write the book of James to the lost or the saved? He wrote it to the saved people. But now listen to what he says in chapter 4, James chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. From whence come wars and fightings among you, not among the nations of the world or among the lost of the world, but he says among you. And he wrote this to save people. Come they not hence, even your lust that war in your own members? You lust and you have not, you kill and you desire to have and you cannot obtain, you fight and war, yet ye have not because you ask not. And you ask and receive not because you ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your lusts. Now, James is being pretty blunt and pretty plain with the folks there that are reading this letter. And you remember James was the pastor of the church in Jerusalem. The home church, if you will, if you want to look at it that way. And so he probably preached this message to his own people there. But the lust of the flesh drives the unsaved, and unless you're very careful, it can also drive the saved, because we will yield to the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, which is talked about in 1 John 2, 15, 16, and 17. And so we have to be on guard about that. Notice there still in James chapter 4, look at verses 7 and 8. He says, submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be afflicted and mourn and weep, and let your laughter to be turned to mourning and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. So that's the solution to it. But do we listen to, or do we heed, or pay attention, or try to achieve the solution? Many times we do not. We accept the situation, we're comfortable with it, we'll continue on in it, and so we become part of society where you can't tell the Christians from the lions, so to speak, without a program. And God's got the program. So there's a lot there that we need to think about, not from the perspective necessarily of the lost, of the Antichrist and his followers, but the followers of the Lord. James 1, verse 8 says, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, trying to serve two masters. And what's the scripture say about that?
You'll love one,
you can't do it.
The other.
You cannot do it. You're going to be loyal to one and not to the other. And so who is our master? You know, well, we say it's Jesus, but do we live like it is? We need to think about that in our day, because when you get to the day that we're talking about here in tribulation, the people who have accepted Christ, they're not going to be so blasé about it. They're not going to be so flippant about it. They're going to stand fast, because if they don't, they're going to die. When they do, they're going to die. They're going to be identified. And so the thing about it is they will be very evident as to who they are. It should be very evident that we are today. We might ask the question, how did we sculpt or develop these ideas that we live by, whatever they may be, the beliefs that we have? Well, as a believer, and remember, James writes to believers and not a lost person, why are all believers not on the same page? Why don't we all serve God in the same way?
Because of interpretation.
Okay, different interpretation. Sandy?
Well, I think it's culture.
Culture? You know.
When Father was in Honduras, you and I would think we were in a honky-tonk if we went into their services. They play their music on turtle shells, on drums made out of hollowed logs with skins on them, castanets that they've made with seashells, because that's what they have.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I would do this. That's why when Colin came home from Honduras, he thought he was at a funeral. You know, he had 13 years of that.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, some churches are like funeral homes, there's no life in them. But, we've told you this before, and I use this from someone else's research. I didn't count them, but there's over 4,000 religions. Now, all religions don't claim Christ and all that, but think about the ones who are called Protestant Christian religions. There's got to be 100 at least, but not all of them do the same thing. And, we've got one God, one Savior, one Holy Spirit. But we do things differently. And we don't all agree on what's going on. And the basic reason is we don't go to the book to find out many times what exactly we're supposed to be doing. Now, we just read James 4, 1 through 3 and 7 and 8, and it gave us a lot of information. But do we heed it? And I'm afraid that our country, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but for our country, I think we're on a slippery slope. We're on a downhill slide because we rely on our experiences, we rely on relationships, we rely on our biases, our prejudices, we rely on somebody else's opinion. To me, I kind of wish they had never invented Facebook and all that kind of stuff, because people will get on there and read anything and go, well, yeah, same thing with the internet. If it's on the internet, it's true, to some people. And we never stop to check it out, to verify things. We just accept it. And so this is the society that we didn't necessarily grow up in. Most of us are younger than the computer age. But what about your grandkids? When they're 2 years old, they got a phone and they know what to do with it. Or maybe younger than that. I don't know.
My brother-in-law calls it the weapons of mass distraction.
It is. Weapon of mass distraction. That's a pretty good definition of it. So where we grew up, the societal influences in that area, who we listen to, who we put our confidence in, that's where we started shaping our ideas and all of that as far as what religion means to us. And religion is not a good thing. Religion is something that somebody has bought into, but Christianity and following Christ is the good thing. But there can be any kind of religion. So if you have little knowledge of the Bible and you do very little with the knowledge you have, then you're going to have little faith. And if you have little faith, you're not going to be very strong for the Lord. You're not going to be, somebody that stands out to a lost and dying world. And too many Christians are still babies. They're still on the pacifier. They need to chunk the pacifier and order a hamburger, grow up, get on the meat. But it's too convenient to just sit and listen to somebody else teach or preach, on television or in person, whichever it may be, and not do any study yourself. And we consider that to be, really being, faithful. Well, if we have little knowledge and little action, and that equals little faith, then the second problem we have is we get too closely tied to worldly thinking. We let somebody else do our thinking for us. A lot of times, it's going to be right on us now. You're fixing to start hearing all the political ads and people telling you how they're going to save the world, save the country, save the state. And they can't even save themselves, from lying to you about it. But we get too tied into worldly thinking. We depend on what somebody else says instead of what God says. And then we default, when we hear all that, to our own thinking, to our own decision-making process. we default to, well, that's the government's job. They'll take care of that. And who has any faith and confidence in the government today? I feel for you. We put it in money. As long as we got plenty of money, we're all right. Well, we just read about these people in Babylon who are watching their livelihood go up in smoke. And they're not going to have that after the fire goes out, or even before the fire goes out. We rely on the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the things, our own pride. And we become double-minded, like James says. So if saved people act like this, as James wrote to them and warned them about it, and the book of Hebrews warns about things of that nature, then how much more so are the unsaved who do not have the Holy Spirit to lead them? So you can see how these people can get in this situation and what's happening there. So they've got slavery. They've got people that they're in one form or another are enslaved to work for them, for their benefit, for their, gain, if you will. And they don't feel bad about that. But that's not the worst thing. Again, at the end of verse 13 there in chapter 18, and it lists all those things that are not going to be available anymore because of the destruction of Babylon. But now we've seen the slaves and how they tie into this. And it says also the souls of men. The souls of men. What's the most precious thing that you have? It's not your health. It's not your money. It's your soul, because your soul is everlasting. It lives forever. It will never die. Now, it will live either in glory with the Lord, or it'll live in hell and torment away from the Lord, but your soul never dies. It is eternal. But all this other stuff is temporary, just a little short time. Even if you live to be 100 years old, that's not even a snap of the fingers when you look at the history of this planet. And of course, when you look at eternity, it doesn't even make a blip on the radar screen. But the thing about it is, we have people who are following after world leaders, or even local leaders, or local people who have an ear that the public will listen to them, and they're putting out some bad stuff. Now, you know who Joseph Lenin is, who founded communism in Russia. Let me tell you what Lenin said, and see if you see any kind of connection between his thinking and what may be the thinking in tribulation times, and maybe even in our times. Lenin said, "What would it matter if 2/3 of this earth were destroyed if the remaining 1/3 is communist?" In other words, as long as I get what I want, as long as things are going good for me, I don't care what happens to you. I don't care if you die. I don't care if you're sick. I don't care if you starve to death, if you don't have any food to eat. Now, that's what's going to be happening in the tribulation times to believers. Some of that is already happening today because Christians don't really care as a whole. Broad statement here. Most Christians, or a lot of Christians, let me say it that way, they go to church and they want to, be seen as a Christian, be known as a Christian, but they don't care if their neighbor lives or dies. They don't care if they go to heaven or hell. They don't care if this person, needs help and this person doesn't. It's just isolationism, I guess, is maybe one way to say it, but they just don't care. And
why things are in the shape that it is now is because years ago when it started getting like this, Christians didn't stand up and put their foot down about removing God from church or from schools, and standing up against like abortion and all this other stuff. That they thought as long as it didn't affect them, it wasn't a big deal, and so things just got piled on worse and worse.
It becomes a personal thing, how we personally look at situations. Back in 1949, the Supreme Court made the first anti-Christian decision, or handed down that decision. And it's gone that way since then. And where have Christians been? Haven't been out there, raising the flag and trying to change it. We just sit back and kind of take it easy and let things happen. You say, well, no, we're not like that. What would you say when you get to heaven and 63 million children who have been aborted in the last 30 or 40 years come up to you and say, where were you? Why weren't you there trying to help me survive? Okay, how are you going to answer them? Since 1973 until 2020, not even to today, but to 2020, 63 million American children have been aborted. Now, that's not worldwide. That's just in America. That's in a Christian nation. You go back and read in the Old Testament about the god of Molech, where they would take their children and place them up on the arms of the idol and then build a fire in the idol, and the kids would just basically lay there and roast. And you think, how terrible can that be? Well, how terrible is it that they never even get a chance to breathe, that they are killed before that? Why? I'm sorry?
Now it's after. They give you up to 29 days after birth.
We've gone so far now that you can be born and then be killed, quote, legally. God's watching all this. He's paying attention. You're not getting anything by on him. And so there's a lot of stuff we just don't stand up against. The statistics say that 2% of this nation is actually gay or homosexual or whatever the word is now. 2%. But yet they're telling 98% of the people what they can say, who they can say it to, how they can say it, and if they don't, then they suffer the consequences. Lawsuits or whatever. And what's our government doing? Passing laws to embolden them. So where were we, and where are we, when people are running for office, that the qualification is not, how good you look or how much money you got or what part of town you live in, but are you a true Christian? Now, there's a lot of Christians when it's election time. They'll tell you, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian. They go to Washington, they go to Austin, or they go wherever, and they start voting for abortion laws and homosexual laws or whatever it is, and you wonder, where is your Christianity? You told us that you were, but I don't see it. But as a country, for the last 75 years, that's what we've done. We keep sending people to make decisions for this country that aren't believers. And we don't support the ones that are believers that well. So what we're seeing in chapter 18, or seeing in the tribulation period as a whole, is a result of decisions that we're making today. That's how the world keeps getting in this place. And we look at it as a detachment and say, well, that's going to be a terrible time. It's going to be a terrible time because we're letting it grow roots right here. Now, that's my opinion. You don't have to agree with that, but it just seemed like everything's falling together. And I would not be the bit surprised if during some of our lifetimes, the rapture is going to happen. And 7 years later, the Lord's coming back. So you say, well, that's pretty harsh. You've been pretty rough this morning. Well, look at chapter 18, verse 14. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. How harsh is that? How harsh is that? The Lord is going to, that was chapter 18 of Revelation, verse 14. Revelation 18:14. Then we get to 15 in chapter 18 of Revelation. We're back over there now, out of James. So we get to verse 15, it says, the merchants of these things, that list in 12 and 13, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. They're in mourning over the system that's being destroyed, over the commercialism that they had been so made wealthy from. You know, if you lived back in London during World War II in the early years, when you heard those sirens, you ran for the shelters. And when you came out, you didn't know if you were going to have a house or a business. It might be bombed out, burned out, not even exist anymore, and everything will be gone. That's what these people are going to find out. And as we said last week, in one of the scriptures, I don't remember which one it was, in 1 hour, very quickly, all of this is going to be destroyed.
Verse 17.
17, thank you. So, when the tough times come, who do you call on? Well, if you're a believer, you can call on the Lord. If you're not a believer, where are your friends going to be? According to this verse, they're standing afar off. Now, why are they standing afar off? It's not necessarily because the fire is that hot. They don't want to get too close. They're standing afar off because they know where this is coming from. They know that this is God's judgment, and they don't want to get too close because they may get caught up in it. They still think they can avoid it. And so the realization of the power of God is going to fall on these people. But they've already made their decision. They've taken the mark of the beast. They have done everything they could to destroy and decimate Christians. They've been maybe they've even killed people. But they may have taken their land, they've taken their houses, they've taken everything they've got, may have even taken their freedom and made slaves of them. And now, notice it says why they're afraid to go, or what's the reason they don't want to go there? For fear. Yes, ma'am.
Brother Nelson, I've noticed, and you have too, if you stop and think, in politics, which, hey, let's don't talk politics in here except where it concerns us. They've gotten to where the news and they don't say Christians anymore, they say conservatives. They don't attack, they're sneaky. But true conservatives are Christians, you know? And so they have started using the term conservative, not Christian. And that's a sneaky attack on anybody who stands for the principles of God.
Well, but you have to remember, not just because you're conservative doesn't mean you're a Christian.
Oh, I know,
You know,
but I'm
so,
saying Christians have been clumped.
Yeah.
Have been clumped with anybody who's conservative.
So, but you know, election time's coming up. Get ready to listen to a bunch of rhetoric and stuff. But the one thing we don't ever hear anybody really say is giving a testimony of how they accepted the Lord. You know, at least I haven't. Of course, I don't listen to a lot of those guys. As soon as I see them, I just put the big word liar and go on.
That's all politicians, ain't it?
Well, that's what I'm saying, you know, just about all of them, but, you know, anyway. But notice it says that in verse 15, they were standing afar off, weeping and wailing. Now, these are the people who had risen in a society, who were wealthy, who were powerful, who, you know, had a lot of say-so over how people lived and what they got and what they didn't get and those kind of things. And now they're like a bunch of little bratty kids that didn't get their way, and they're crying and whining because now their livelihood's gone. God knows how to hit people where it hurts, and this is how he hit those people for sure. What it also may do is give us a little bit of an indication as to where Babylon might be. Now, we don't know where it's at. You know, Tell you that right up front. A lot of people think it's Rome. Some people think it's Babylon in Iraq. They think that the Euphrates River is going to be dredged out and make a way for big ships to come in there to unload and load. I don't know what's going to happen. But notice what it said about Babylon. It's on 7 hills. I don't think there's 7 sand hills in Iraq. I don't know. But anyway, a lot of scholars believe it to be Rome. Now, Rome is not on the seacoast. It's 15 miles inland, but it's up on a hill, 7 hills, and it's visible from the ocean. You could see these clouds of smoke rising up very easily. Rome is where persecution of the Christians basically began and spread from there. And also, it may be Rome, but don't hang your hat on that. That's not that important. God knows where it's at, and He's going to take care of it. But don't worry about that part of it. But these people who have exploited others and who have been greedy and the dollar has been their God, all of a sudden they find themselves destitute. Verse 17 then, for in 1 hour, that's what I was looking for, thank you, Linda. For in 1 hour so great riches has come to naught. Very quickly this city will be destroyed. And every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like unto this great city? Kind of like the Titanic. The Titanic, the ship that would never sink. And on its maiden voyage, it sunk. They will have the same idea about this Babylon, that it's too great. Nobody can overcome it. It's too powerful. But yet, God can, and He does. And so, the time frame is very short, and it's a complete destruction. He takes the whole thing out. But they're like a bunch of little kids sitting around crying because their money's gone. Their God is gone. Their God was money. And then verse 19, and they cast dust on their heads, and they cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Who would you turn to, or what would you do if all of a sudden all of your money is gone? You don't have anything. And you say, well, I'm not going to spend it all that fast. If we go to digital currency, you have no control over it. Because if whoever controls that decides they don't want you to have money, your account zeroes out on a computer and that's it. Now, they're doing that in China, and they're trying to do it here. So it'll probably happen one of these days. But just think about it. What would you do if you had absolutely nothing and you were completely destroyed? These people have no God to turn to. Their God was their money, and their God is dead. And so, is that me?
No, it's an
Okay.
abduction thing.
Oh, okay. All right. Does it mean I need to shut up? Is that the time for this? Okay. Thought maybe some of you had me on the timer there. All right. So you get the idea of what's going on. I mean, we're not going to belabor this. You see what's happening here. Now, verse 20, rejoice over her. All of a sudden, the scene shifts. We're away from these people who are crying and throwing dirt on their heads and distraught over losing everything. And who are we seeing here? Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. We're seeing those people who were faithful to the Lord. We're seeing the heaven side of it now, not the earth side. And those people who are in heaven with the Lord, and they're getting to witness this, and this voice is telling them, you have been vindicated. The Lord has taken your trials, your tribulations, your execution, your martyrdom, and all the things that that people put you through, that the followers of the Antichrist and the followers of Satan have put you through, and you have been vindicated because now they have been, it has happened to them. And then in verse 21, notice that we get another heavenly glimpse here, and it says, and a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. Now, what happened when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed? Have they either one been rebuilt?
No.
No. What's going to happen when this Babylon, whatever it is, whether it be Rome or some other city, is destroyed? During the millennium, it's going to be peace. But will anybody be living there?
No.
No. Because when God says, shall be found no more at all, that means shall be found no more at all. Total destruction. Okay? This is why I think that he warned the believers early in chapter 18 to get out. They probably had just enough time to clear the gates before this started happening. But he warned them to get out. And those were some who were slaves who had been brought in to work for the rich people. Maybe they were slaves by choice. That's the only way they could make a living, to feed their families and try to survive. It's going to be some tough times that we've never seen. But I think it's important that we remember that it shall be found no more. The city will be completely destroyed. And the voice of harpers, verse 22, and musicians and pipers and trumpeters. In other words, the parties and all the stuff that the rich people were going to, shall be heard no more at all in thee. No craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. No industry, no carpenters, no welders, nobody that works. And of course, if you don't have any crafts, then you don't have any people to sell it. You don't have any stores, things of that nature. There's nothing. Business is gone. And the sound of the millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. In other words, there's going to be no productivity whatsoever. It's going to be destroyed. Verse 23 then, and the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more in thee, at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Now, keep in mind that we're talking about a commercial destruction. But what is the real cause of the destruction? It's not that they did business, not that they were greedy, not that they were, taking advantage of people.
They rejected
False
God.
religion, false prophecy, false gods. That's the baseline. That's what the destruction is about. 17 dealt with the system. Chapter 17 dealt with the system of the false religion. And chapter 18 deals with the physical properties of it. But the false religion is taken down, is destroyed. Now you realize what's happening. We're getting real close to the second coming. In fact, in chapter 19, it's coming. So if you're interested in that, well, you want to be here probably within the next month. We might get there. Just come on. I don't know when we'll get there. But anyway, verse 22 and 23 paint a picture of desolation, of hopelessness, of despair, of utter destruction. And the fact that this city was so powerful and so wealthy and so prominent throughout the world, and all the major players were drawn to it. Think what happened to the Egyptian army when they tried to cross the Red Sea after the Israelites. All God did was let the water go, and the greatest army on earth at that time was destroyed. Same thing's going to happen here. A little bit different, but same theory there. And so not only is it going to be destroyed, but it's not going to be rebuilt. You know, if you lived in London, or if you lived in Germany, whatever the capital of Germany is, I've already forgotten. Berlin, during Second World War, it was destroyed. But they've been rebuilt. This one will not be rebuilt. It'll be gone forever. So when God destroys something, it stays destroyed. The good times aren't there, the merriment, the parties, and all of those kind of things. And then verse 24, and in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. Now this may be talking about during the tribulation time, or it may be talking about in times gone by. If it is talking about times gone by, that may be one reason so many people, so many scholars think that it refers to Rome, because that's where the persecution and all started, and where they fed the Christians to the lions and those kind of things, and the gladiators. If it's dealing with the tribulation saints and prophets and preachers and those people who are trying to spread the gospel, it could be anywhere. Yes, ma'am?
Can I point out something?
Sure.
You mentioned that Rome is how many miles inland?
About 15.
Okay, Port of Houston. Houston is 50 miles inland, but man has made a way. They come into the Port of Houston by canal that was done. Rome, 15 miles in modern time is nothing.
Yeah.
Well, there's gonna be a lot
They
of,
don't have the port of.
Well, they can unload at the seashore and then truck it in or what. I mean, there's all kinds of ways it could be used, but or accessed. So the thing about it is, these people made a decision of who they were going to follow, and now it's come back to bite them. Now think about this. The followers made their decision on three things. One, what they wanted to hear. They didn't want to hear the truth. They didn't listen to the two witnesses in Jerusalem. They did not listen to the 144,000 Jewish evangelists that were called out. They listened to the false prophet. And so when they heard what they wanted to hear, then that shows their self-indulgence. They're looking at themselves and more concerned about me than anything else. Second thing is, they didn't even try to search out the scriptures to find the real truth. They just accepted a liar's account of things. Now, who do you trust? I told you from the very beginning, research the scriptures, and because I may say something I don't mean to say or say something wrong, but research the scriptures and help me stay on track. Don't just take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it unless you know for sure it's true. And so they had a misplaced trust. They put it in the false prophet and they put it in the Antichrist, and of course that's the same as putting it in Satan, and he's a liar. The Bible tells us that. And then the third thing is that they did just what they were told to do. They didn't have questions about it. They did exactly what they were asked to do, even though they may have known it was wrong, which shows a lack of integrity. So they have self-indulgence, misplaced trust, and integrity issues. That's a bad combination. But tragically, today, we see the same thing going on. And not only in the lost, we see some of that going on in saved people. In people who claim to be believers, and probably some of them are. Now, if you were to stand before God, or when these people stand before God and say, well, they told me the wrong thing. They didn't tell me the truth. What's he going to say when you want to go to heaven? Depart from me, I never knew you. What's he going to say when you go, well, I trusted them? He is going to say, depart from me, I never knew you. You didn't trust my son. And when they're going to say, when they say, well, they lacked integrity. They didn't do what they said they were going to do. They didn't, they didn't give me the opportunity to show my integrity. What will the answer be? depart from me. There are no excuses. God has given us the answer. He said, John 14:16, Jesus said himself, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Without me, nobody goes to the Father. You have to go through me. And that's the bottom line. But what do you hear today? There's many ways to heaven. And people are buying into that. Where are they hearing the other side of it? That's our job. Are we telling them the other side of it? You know, the problem is many Christians don't accept responsibility. When you become a Christian, you also assume responsibility, but you can not accept it, and a lot of them don't, because they don't want to be talked about, or they don't want somebody to, get mad at them, or they don't want to embarrass anybody, or maybe they're just afraid because they won't read their Bible, or they even won't come to church. You probably know, I know people that join the church and are baptized and claim to be saved, and then you never see them again because the world draws them back in. I haven't told you anything that you don't already know, but I'm trying to point out the fact that we need to be active with our faith. We need to be involved in the study of the Word, and we need to be sharing that with others. So kind of an epilogue to this chapter. We don't know where Babylon is. It doesn't matter. God knows where it is. It'll all reveal itself in time. And there's or Babylon is the seat of false worship. And that's the main issue. It's not necessarily the commerce. The commerce was the earthly part of it that, drew people to it. But the false worship was the main thing. That was the abomination in God's sight. And so we see this in several references, and we see where they have killed the apostles, the prophets, and those people who were trying to share the truth. There's a corrupt worship system, and there's a corrupt commercial system, and all of that. But just so we don't have to worry about what's going on, look at chapter 19, which we haven't gotten to, in verse 2. For true and righteous are his judgments, for he hath judged the great whore, the great harlot, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication, and hath avenged the blood of his servants at her hand. God's in control. Regardless of how bad it gets, how we give up hope, God is still in control. And he is going to have his way, and it will come out just exactly his way, how he wants it to. So, what's the application? We can look forward to eternity, look forward to being in heaven, look forward to, an eternity of bliss with him. But you have to make that decision now. And I trust that all of you have. But the first thing that the world needs to hear is there's only one way to God. And they're going to say, oh no, you're wrong, or you're too narrow-minded, or you're just one of them fanatics. Well, it doesn't matter. God made the rules, and you have to play by his rules. You cannot change the rules. And John 14:6 is the verse that you need to know. And then we have to know that all who call upon his name, truly call upon his name, will be saved. The scriptures tell us that. Now, there's people who call upon his name, but they call on him in times of distress and trouble just for him to get them out of that. They're not making a commitment of faith. They're just hoping that he's going to, be benevolent and help them out. And then when they truly find out that they need the Lord, we need to know the scriptures to point them to. Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Everybody's a sinner. Romans 6:23. Romans 10:9, 10, and 11. It's called the Roman Road. We've probably got a track up there that's got that on it. You can stick that in your pocket and give it to somebody, read it to them, share it with them, whatever. But as Christians, we can't just sit back and wait for somebody else to do it. We had a preacher here one time, which I thought the world of, And I said something one time about maybe we ought to go over and visit so-and-so. And he goes, they know where the church is. If they want to come, they can come. I don't think that's the way Jesus had it planned when he gave us the Great Commission, to just let them come if they want to. We got to take a little effort to reach out, to step out. And so let's make sure that we stay in the Word, and that we are committed to the Word, and that we're committed to the commandments. If you just study the commandments that Jesus gave in the New Testament, it can make a world of difference in the way that we live, the way that we view people around us, and all of that. We don't really have time to get into chapter 19 today, so we'll pick that up next week. But I encourage you to read and study chapter 19. It's one of the great chapters, and this is the one where, quote, we win. You know, this is the one we've been looking for. But there's some things that happen before that are in the first portion of this chapter, before we get to the Battle of Armageddon and the millennial reign. But take a look at that, and I think you'll be encouraged by it.